Eve, I told you this before, but I am so freaking pumped because you're one of those people who, and it's weird because I actually hadn't followed you on Instagram. So I'm very sorry about that. I just followed you recently. So I want to make sure you understand that I'm saying this wholeheartedly. You are like this mystical figure that I reference as if I know you all the freaking time. My husband knows all about you. We know all about your method. And I talk about you to anyone with ears, especially all of my friends who are just going through
Yes.
postpartum for the first time because they're calling me being like, I want to kill my fucking husband. I don't know what to
Yeah.
do. I'm doing everything. And I'm like, girl, sit down, have a date night when you're calm and get fair play at home. The card deck. Is that the correct
Yes,
name?
yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
I send them the link. Sometimes I'll buy it for them and ship it to them. I'm like, this is what you need. So, Eve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Cam, for having me. I think I can't, thank you enough. I think this is one of those last frontiers of feminism,
Mhm.
where ironically it's in the closest place to us. So there's a lot of shame
Yeah.
about talking about your partner, right? Everybody has to qualify, but my partner is amazing. We don't
Yeah.
need to always do that. We'll just like throw that aside and just assume that our partners, all of your partners are amazing.
Yes.
We're not here, to attack men, but we are talking, I think, today about, centering this idea of, women married to men and sort of what expectation disassociation that can cause, especially once kids come.
Absolutely. We talk about this all the time on the show, the concept of both and like two conflicting emotions can coexist at once. I don't feel need to constantly be putting these disclaimers in because we know your husband's great. You wouldn't be married to him otherwise, you know? Like, so I'm with you.
100%. We don't need those disclaimers. We're just allowed to
Yeah,
talk about hard things. So that's what we're going to
exactly.
do.
So, fair play as a method, I am a huge fan of because I think it has shifted completely the way that my husband and I operate our household. And it came at a very crucial time for us. I honestly cannot remember. I was trying to think of today who introduced me to it, but it came at a very crucial moment in time, about 2 months after having our first child, where I felt incredibly burnt out. I felt like I was doing everything. At that point, I was exclusively breastfeeding. So a lot was physically and mentally falling on me. And he felt like he was doing a lot and he wasn't necessarily getting the credit for doing certain things. And us sitting down and actually going through this card deck, and we'll get into what that entails, made us realize how much each was actually doing, which
Mhm.
helped like level the playing field and made him realize the wear and tear of the mental load because that was so much of what I was physically holding. We
Yes. Yes.
recalibrated who owned what task, and we've gone from there. I think we could use a recalibration again, and we talk about it a little bit, and we'll get into that. But I want to go back before Fair Play because I know you were working in the corporate world. We actually both were at JP Morgan at one
Oh,
point.
yay.
But how did you find yourself interested in this field of work? Like, what led you to care about this misproportionate ownership of labor between couples?
Well, definitely. I like to say, like, yes, I'm an expert on the gender division of labor, Cam. But that was not what was on my third grade. What do you want to be when you grow up
Of
bored?
course.
I think it actually said, I actually found it recently, which is so weird. Someone sent me my yearbook
Oh
from
my God.
PS40, and it said I wanted to travel the world alone, actually. So that's very different from being an expert on the gender division of labor. But I think, like many women, especially of my age, I'm 47, we came up right after the 1970s feminists. And we were born to those feminists in a way. And so what we heard growing up was that we could do anything. And I believed it. And I graduated from law school believing that. And I talk a lot about sort of Elizabeth Warren. I remember before she was a senator, she was a professor at Harvard Law School, and she was our orientation teacher asking what we wanted to do with our law degree. And I legit said a very legally blonde answer of I was going to be president of the United States and a senator from New York and a Nick City
I would vote for
dancer.
you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. And I wanted to dance on the iconic Madison Square Garden. And again, in sort of the typical legally blonde fashion, I felt like it wouldn't be that hard to do all things at
Of
once
course.
because you could fly Air Force One in to dance in the iconic Madison Square Garden for a Saturday 12:30 game. You could change for state dinner on the way back on the plane. You can legislate during the day, issue executive orders at night. I think this idea of smashing all of these glass ceilings, like that energy, was how I came into my 20s, Cam. And then if you look at me in my early 30s, 10 years later, the only thing I can tell you that I was like legitimately smashing was, peas for my toddler, Zach, while breastfeeding a baby, Ben, while also trying to negotiate a return to work in a very hostile environment that told me if I wanted to breastfeed, I would need to do it in a converted broom closet that didn't have outlets. So I'd have to bring a battery pack.
That sounds
Also,
great. Just like what
yes,
you want.
so just so sounds really appetizing and fun. Not very hospitable to breastfeeding women, and then on top of that, having to negotiate with a preschool that a toddler transition program that only was for 2 hours. At that time, I didn't know any of these systemic issues. All I knew was that I was trying to do all of these things and hearing that my life is going to get easier once I went into a school setting. And when I got to that school setting,
In
Cam,
what
I had
sense?
this, well, in that America is not set up for a social safety net for women. We don't have universal childcare. We don't have health insurance. So a lot of women who take a step back become independent contractors and they actually stay married, even if they don't want to be married because of health insurance
Mhm.
from their partners. It's just not really designed to support women who want to become mothers in any way, shape, or form. And so a lot of the messaging I heard was, oh, don't worry, when you get into a school setting, that's when you're going to get time back.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
Yes. And so once you get your kids, into kindergarten, everything changes. Well, once I entered a school setting, I got to access a preschool teacher who said that this school setting was going to be the people that knew me better than anyone's ever known me. They were going to be my social safety net and my support system, Cam. And then I remember looking down at my name tag for that support system, and my name tag legitimately said Zach's mom.
No, absolutely
And
not.
so, right? So how are these going to be the people that are going to know me better than anyone's ever known me? They don't even know my fucking name. And so I think the trifecta of being abandoned by my school system into my role as Zach's mom, my workplace abandoning me in these, microaggressions, taking away my direct reports, giving me these hostile places to breastfeed. And then on top of it, having a partner that wasn't showing up for me in the way that I thought that he would, given that he promised, quote unquote, he was
Mhm.
going to be an equal partner. That trifecta was so painful that actually the two words that ended up being the word cloud that a lot of women use now that I've been researching this area for 10 years, the two words that come up the most when I talk to women are overwhelm and erasure. And that was how I was living at the time.
What's
That
the
that was my
latter
rock
word?
bottom.
Erasure?
Erasure. Yes. So
What
like
does that
erasure,
mean?
Erasure, and it means sort of erasing of your identity
I've
into your
never heard
roles.
that,
Yes.
but I fully resonate with that,
Yeah.
like
Parents,
deeply.
parent, partner, professional, that is what you're allowed to be. And you're not really allowed to be anything else. You want to be an acrobat. You want to have a day where you say the most important thing you did that day is outside of being a parent, a partner, and or a professional. It's not really allowed for women. So that's what I mean by that erasure. Yes.
This whole concept of having your identity or a part of your identity outside of your kids is something I care deeply about in a multitude of ways because I very much sometimes feel like I do not. I have a 3-year-old and a 7-month-old, so I'm like in it very much.
Yeah.
And, a lot of my job revolves around motherhood in the sense of my content focuses on parenting and motherhood and mental health. So it like ties in there.
Yep.
And of course, with my partner, so much of our relationship is logistical, managing children.
Yes. Yes.
And I actually texted my girlfriends today because you talk about how your goal or one of the goals for females specifically is to be consistently interested in your own life.
Correct.
And when I heard you say that, I started questioning whether I am. And I then sent a text to like a few group chats I'm in asking if they are. And it sparked a really interesting conversation. And so many of us, I notice from people in my DMs, whether they're agreeing with me or they're trolling me about doing something.
Right.
And so many of my group chats is that so many of us do not make time for fun.
Abs
Like,
100%.
and again, I want to get into like how you create a fair play. So I don't want to forget this point though. It's something I'm really struggling with personally in my relationship because I'm really fucking jealous that my husband constantly is able to prioritize his hobbies and the fact that he even has hobbies. And I have made it like a goal of mine over the past month and a half, maybe, to find hobbies because I don't even know what my hobbies are anymore. And
But you know,
it's
I hate that
been
word. So I'm going to make you never,
hobbies.
I want to make sure you never use that word again because
Okay, why? Tell me.
hobbies, again, this is data research now from surveys that we've done over 10 years. One of the number one things that people can note when they say the word hobbies is infrequency. I'll get to
Oh,
piano playing when I want to, or, I'll pick up crocheting when I have the time, or this is now not the time for a hobby when I have a 7-month-old. And that is a very different concept than my entire second book, which is incredibly well researched. And I'm here to tell you that, spoiler alert, that the antidote to burnout and languishing is being consistently interested in your own life requires a consistent practice that hobbies will never be able to connote. That's why I
okay.
changed the term to what I call unicorn space, which is an idea that you deserve to have space for things that are mythical and magical. And that is not self-care, which you deserve as well. And it's not friendship time, which is also important. Unicorn space is something that is different. And I will say that it ties in very closely to the conversation we're having about fair play, because the overwhelm and erasure is what the fair play movement's about, Cam. So, overwhelm, we're going to get into what the system is to help you gain some time back so you
Hmm.
feel less overwhelmed. To tackle overwhelm, it's really the opposite of what most people say, which is that the three most toxic words you can ever use in a relationship is you're going to figure it out. So let's just like shelve those words, right? So the opposite of figure it out is what fair play is. But the opposite of erasure is that you deserve to be more than a parent, a partner, and a professional. And that is science backed. It's related to your longevity. And so that's why hobby doesn't do it justice, because what I'm saying is that creativity is literally not optional. A unicorn space is not optional, and it's tied to all these mental health outcomes, and we will get there. But I do want to just put that pin in it for those
Fair.
out
Fair.
here to say that if you're coming to fair play by saying I can't have my partner come to the table, if that's where you are, saying I feel completely overwhelmed and erased, but I don't feel like I can have my partner to come to the table, then stay here with us, because the unicorn space entry point and the conversation is going to be a great place to enter. If you're
Okay.
somebody who like Cam's, what's your partner's name, Cam?
Joe.
I love Joe. So if you're someone like Joe and 2 months in, you're willing to sit down at the table and say, yes, we want to continue to practice getting better and making each of us feel less overwhelmed in this new parenting thing, then you start with fair play. So that's why actually I'm glad you brought up this idea of this, what we're going to be talking about in terms of unicorn space, because there's two entry points into this conversation. The person who's just ready to go and be more
Hmm.
efficient with their lives, I'm here for you. But those who say I couldn't even come to the table yet, we're also here for you.
Okay. All right. Let's sidebar unicorn play
Yes, yes, yes.
because I do want to dive into that and how I've started to make it a true priority. Back to creating fair play and what it is today. You found yourself in this trifecta of being let down, quite honestly. And
Yes.
if you can hear my
Yes.
children screaming, it's because it's
Yes.
bedtime when we're recording and
Yes.
my
Yes.
husband is doing it right now. Because I hear one of them. But I
And by the way, if
know
you're interrupted, we're all good here, because women are
it's he
interrupted
can
every
do it.
3 minutes and 42
No,
seconds, but it's okay. It's
I mean
okay.
that's insane and I believe it, but he can handle this. Um, you talk about the blueberry text. Bring us to that moment where you got the text from your husband that felt like one of your, not to put words in your mouth, but breaking points.
Yeah, it was my breaking point. I'll always remember that day. In the midst of all that I was telling you about earlier, Cam, the hell with my workplace and my community not knowing my name, Seth decides to send me a text. And as you said, that text said, I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. When I literally sat on the side of the road in LA, which we don't take traffic lightly. So for a text to make me pull over and start to cry, and be late to pick up that child from that toddler transition program, it had to be pretty dire. And it was dire because, I mean, Cam, you know the scene. I had a
No,
breast
I
pump and
would lose my fucking shit.
right. But also, you know the scene because you're in it. You're
Hmm.
exactly the same age my kids were when this text came through. I had the breast pump and the diaper bag in the passenger seat of my car. I had gifts for a newborn baby to return in the back seat of my car. I had a client contract in my lap because I was transitioning out of that corporate hostile environment to start my own law firm. And so I was marking up that contract in between my legs. I always say, like, what I remember about that day was the pen was like sort of stabbing me in the vagina. Like when I would hit the brakes, that pen, I remember it. And so what made me pull over with that text was not just that I was the fulfiller of Seth's smoothie needs, which is what I was feeling at the time, but actually a statistic I didn't know I was living. And so that's that day. We'll talk about that journey to what fair play became. But that day, I was living a statistic: women married to men shoulder 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family. The 2/3 gets worse as women make more money. So if women are the breadwinners, it's actually worse. So we know it's a gender
That's
issue, not a money
fascinating.
issue, right? So that is, I wish I knew that. And so I think what the journey taught me was that I would never allow someone else to break down in that moment, blaming themselves for what they got themselves into. It would not explain, even if they didn't use the fair play system. And there is a solution, and we'll talk about it. But even if you didn't use the system, I just wanted people to understand they're not alone.
Yep.
That we are in a system that is literally there to fight against your time autonomy every single minute of every single day. That is what a patriarchy is. And so I vowed that there would be something good coming out of that breakdown. Now, at the time, Cam, my only options were sort of Eat, Pray, Love that had just come out the year before. So I could eat, pray, love it out of my marriage. But I had two small kids. I came from a single mother household. I know how hard it is in America to be, a single mother. And so and that's not even why, but I like Seth, I wanted
Right.
to try to make it
Like you
work.
want it to work.
I did. I really enjoyed him as a partner. And so the only other choice I had were really to become a gray version of myself and to say, in the time it takes me to tell Seth, how to buy his own blueberries, I could just do it myself. Or I could get my ass in gear and become my own client. And so, Cam, that's what I did. Basically, I took my day job, which is working in organizational systems for really difficult families that look like the HBO show Succession. And I decided if I can design systems for these families that allow them to have grace and humor and generosity during the most complex
Mhm.
organizational and financial decisions, why couldn't I design that same system for my own family? And that's really what the question on my whiteboard was, which is how much of a nerd I am, that I literally have a whiteboard everywhere I go. And I have these giant pieces, pads of paper behind me. And the question I asked myself was, what if I treated my home as my most important organization? And I
Because
started
it
from
also
there.
is. Like,
Well,
I don't
yes, it
think
is, of course, but nobody had said that before. When I
no,
looked up
nobody.
organization, it was how do you organize your junk drawer? I can't find anybody who said the home is an organization before I said it, to be honest.
No, and even this is a tangent, but we just hired a full-time nanny
Yep.
2 months ago, and she's completely changed my life. And when we were interviewing her, she said, like, I'm not someone who's just going to focus on the kids. I really want to help around the house, all of the things that you
Yes.
really
Yes. You
want to
want to
hear and
hear?
find.
Yes.
And she turns to me and she's like, so her first week, do you have a schedule for the laundry? And I was like, Joe, do we have a schedule for the laundry? And he's like, no, I just kind of do it whenever like the laundry's always done. He's doing
Yeah.
it, but
Yeah.
there's
Yes.
no schedule. And she's like, well, let's implement a schedule. Monday we do the boys, Tuesday we do yours, Wednesday we do the towels, Thursday we do any leftover for the weekend. I'm like, yeah, why wasn't that ever
Totally.
something we thought of? Like it is so much easier when these structures are in place, but when you're in it, it can feel so daunting to even think about implementing them. And also you don't have time to even think. Like it's not even, there's no space
Absolutely.
in your brain to even realize that that would help, if that makes sense. And so
Absolutely.
that's why I
But
love fair play.
remember, it's because we said before when you would have had space to play a game like fair play and to implement
Of
systems,
course.
you said to yourself, we're just going to what? The three words I just said earlier, we're going to figure it out.
Yep.
And you don't. Not
Nope. No.
you. One doesn't. And the reason why is exactly how you just explained it. Because when you're in the moment, our cognition is low and our emotion is high. When you're in low cognition, high emotion situations, which is pretty much every minute of every day after a child comes, it's doable, of course, but it's going to be harder to change from the reactive to the systematic. And that is really what we want.
And I'm trying so hard, not only in our family, but in my work, because I find myself so reactive. And then by the end of the day, I'm exhausted, I'm drained out, I'm burnt out. My brain has not stopped functioning and like
Right.
going, it's a ping
Exactly.
pong. It's a literal ping pong match inside my brain 24/7. So you then create this spreadsheet that you
Right.
send to your husband
Yes.
of
Yes.
what is it, 3,000 tasks?
Yes. So at the time, what I didn't understand, like I said, was that, and so what I decided to do, because I decided to get my ass in gear and become my own client, was to start understanding the problem around me. And so what it turns out is that this problem that we're talking about, Kim, actually has a name. It has a couple of names, actually. It's called the second shift. It's called emotional labor. It's called the mental load. But my favorite term was actually coined in 1986 by a sociologist named Arlene Kaplan Daniels. And what she called what was happening to women was invisible work.
Yep.
And what I loved about that term was that it was exactly how I felt about what I was doing, that I knew it had value, but because it was invisible, I couldn't even articulate at the end of the day what I had done that day. And so it ended up being, this sort of back and forth between Seth and me of, well, you're not doing anything, you're not doing anything, you're eating bonbons all day, or what. It was it was like a really, really bad dynamic. And so what my first step was if something's invisible, it was to make it visible. And so that was the initial step. The initial step was, and this is when I was hearing the toxic messaging, because remember, this is 2011. The only messaging around the home was, well, just make a list and then your partner will help you, right? So I want to just like
So you do all the
burn that.
work
Right. You do all the work and then you'll get a
and
helper.
they'll just like finish
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
task.
Go fuck that. Right. So,
Mhm.
but at the time I didn't know any different because again, I'm developing this as we go. And so what I did was I decided to make that list. And I said, I'll make that list better than anyone's ever made that list. And so I looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I looked at time use studies. I looked at everybody who had made lists of what women do and how we measure our time. And there was these very broad generic categories of housework and childcare. The problem with those categories is men overreport what they do and women underreport what they do. I wasn't getting good data. So I decided to do it for myself. So over 9 months, I created the Should I Do spreadsheet. It was an Excel spreadsheet that had 98 tabs on the bottom, if you sort of could envision Excel. And of those 98 tabs, each tab had every single thing it took to execute that tab. And that was because in my process of gathering data, when women and men would say to me, we both handle grocery shoppings or we both change the baby's diaper, the only way I could actually get real data was asking the second most important question I ever asked in my life, besides the organization question, which was, how does mustard get in your refrigerator? And once I asked that as an organizational specialist, I could break down that women married to men were the ones who know, recognize, conceive of the fact that yellow mustard should be in their refrigerator because they watch their second son, Johnny, eat protein only if they dip it in yellow mustard.
Mhm.
And then I was able to see that it was women who get stakeholder buy-in for what the family needs on the grocery list and then monitor that mustard for when it ran low. They didn't actually say stakeholder buy-in, but I was looking for that as an
I love
organizational
it.
management person. And then the reason why men were saying they were involved in groceries was because they were the ones executing on that task and going to the store. But they're bringing home spicy Dijon every fucking time, right? And you're asking for yellow mustard. And so then I had women saying to me, well, Eve, I'm never going to be able to implement your system because I can't trust my partner with my living will. Like the dude doesn't even know how to bring home the right type of mustard. So what I realized what was actually happening in the home was that the two things that I try to build up for my clients are accountability and trust. And most hetero cisgender couples that I was talking to, and this was just in America, then I ended up in talking to couples in 17 countries. And Fair Play is translated in many languages now, which is so
Did
cool.
the other countries show similar data? Sorry, before you
Same
dive in.
data, same
Okay.
data. Even the Nordic countries that you think do it so well, like Finland and Sweden
Mhm.
and Norway, they were just as bad. Women shoulder conception and planning. And if we're lucky, men come in as helpers with execution. So once you can close that gap and bring the ownership mindset, the conception, planning, and execution have to stay together. Like it doesn't work. I'm not going to work for you, Cam, and say, hey, what should I be doing today? I'm going to wait here to tell me what to do. Even your nanny, right? You're not going to, she was asking you about your laundry schedule. That's what you want. You don't want someone saying, hey,
You want
Cam,
proactive.
what should I be doing today? I'm going to sit here and wait till you tell me what to do. That doesn't work. Even my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group has more clearly defined expectations. You don't bring snack twice to that group and you're out. So the home was the only place I could find where there was one person leading the charge in this uh, ownership mind, and then another person and everybody around them was coming in the helper mindset. And that is highly, highly toxic for women. And so Fair Play went from the should I do spreadsheet to these two data revolutions that ended up turning it into a system. People are afraid of the word system, but a system is just what Cam said about laundry. All it does is it helps you make decisions before you have to make that decision.
It's the best
And
thing in the
by
world.
doing
I don't want
that,
to
it's
make
the best
decisions.
thing in the world because it lets you cut down on decision fatigue, which gives you more mental space and clarity, which is what all adults need, not just women. And so men see the benefit of the system as well. And so now we have, millions, I would say at this point, of people who play a version of this game across the world. And it's really, really cool because it's sort of become this movement, Cam, because every single day you're going to have to convince someone else to come to the table because this is the
Mhm.
last frontier and it's so private and so shaming, and so that's why it's so great we're having this conversation today. So that's a
No,
long answer for how it went from a spreadsheet to a system,
it's
basically.
perfect. I love that. I'm not going to call it petty behavior, but I love this like little fight and you being like, bitch, I'm going to show you to your
Right.
husband
Yes, yes,
all the
yes.
shit I do
Yeah,
turned
yeah,
into the business that it is today. Like, that's
yeah,
fucking awesome. And it shows how many women feel the exact same
yeah,
way.
yeah.
So, the Fair Play book is amazing. And there's the card deck where
Right.
basically there are 100 cards, I believe.
Exactly. That's what the should I do spreadsheet was. So there was
Yes.
98 tabs on that spreadsheet that evolved into 98 cards. And the reason why there's actually 100 cards in the deck is because of what we said earlier, because there's two unicorn space cards that add to the 100 cards, basically. So overall, the Fair Play deck is a metaphor for what has to happen in your home. And there's 60 cards that are ownership conversations that will be in play if you don't have children. And then you add 40 additional cards to your deck. It doesn't mean you have to play with them all at the same time, but there's a possibility for 40 additional cards to enter your deck if you have children, if that makes sense. And I think that's really important, Cam, because you realize that even if you don't even use the system, the idea that that you're adding 40 additional tasks to your plate when a child arrives, not to mention how much grindier the other tasks get, like laundry, which were already there, but
Right.
then get, more intense. But you're adding 40 additional things to think about and to do and to partner on. That's why it's so stressful, because it just gives you some grace to understand you're adding double your work. I mean,
Mhm.
and then you're expected to still work the same and bring in the same amount of money and be your top earner of your life at the same time. There's just so many expectations on people who are having children that it can literally crush you, I think. But if we can normalize and then at least take some agency in making that part better, then you can also know that I'm also fighting for you on the policy side to make things easier to be a parent in America. but we have to be able, we're breathing polluted air, but as we all know, we still have to breathe. And this
I
fair play is
also
helping you breathe. Yes.
I think that, like, yes, it's so daunting, the fact that when you have a child, there's so many more tasks, and you can understand that, but you can't conceptually really comprehend
Right.
what
Right. What
happens
that,
until you
right.
have said child. And I have this conversation with many of my friends. However, I think that this should be empowering because fair play empowers you, in my opinion, to live this life with more tasks
Right.
more efficiently and just in a general better state of mind. So for us, once we sat down and went through the deck,
Yeah.
it was noticeable how many more tasks I held, which was eye-opening when we did it. I don't
Yeah.
know if this was actually
Yeah.
recommended, but before we divvied them out to like what you own, we did what we currently own.
Yeah,
And
that's a fine way to, as long as, if you're coming
and then we
in.
divvied.
Yeah, yeah, I was going to say that that works well if you are in a low emotion, high
It
cognition
was a
moment.
very,
Yeah, yeah,
yes,
exactly. It doesn't
it
work
was
well
not a
if somebody
fight
is
that was
screaming
like,
at
sit down right
sit
now.
down, and I can't deal with all these cards,
Sit
get
down,
them off my
shut up, and
plate.
look at these cards. No, we
Exactly
were in
right.
a great state and
Yes,
it was a
yes.
great night. Our baby went down easily and we were like, okay, let's do this. And that visual was so helpful for both of us because, as my husband had stated, he felt like he was doing a lot and he wasn't getting credit for the things he was doing. And I was still acting like he wasn't doing anything, but his
Yeah,
tasks were very tangible. You could
yeah.
see a start and a finish. He emptied the dishwasher, he
Right,
cleaned
right.
the
Yes,
bottles.
yeah.
Like those things are tangible. What he wasn't seeing I was doing was the 10,000 thoughts that go
Right.
through my brain 24/7 in terms of the mental load. So, yes, the diapers arrive and you think, oh, she bought diapers, but you're not thinking of all the math that I'm doing. What size are they? Are they going to be in this size for the next order? If I order 4 packs, are they still going to be in that size? How many diapers do we go through a day? If I get to that time, should we then be in the next size up? Like so many things to the point where the other day we were packing a whole separate thing.
That's another
Packing
card.
in and of
Yes.
itself is,
There's actually two packing cards. There's packing for
yes.
travel and there's packing backpacks. So that's,
Yeah.
and AKA diaper bags as well. Yes.
So when we were packing, I was like, okay, I'm really stressed out. I have a lot of work to do. If I'm going to pack the boys' clothes, can you make sure that you have our dog food, our bottles, and formula ready? And he's like, yeah, should I just bring one can? And I was like, we'll do the math. And he's like, what
Exactly.
math? And I'm like, what do you mean? And obviously he
Yeah.
understands he knows the baby schedule. He knows how many ounces are in each bottle.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like the fact that he had never been put in the position to have to do that equation was pretty eye-opening to me, where I'm like, what do you mean what math? How many days are we there? How many bottles does he get a day? How many ounces each bottle? How many ounces are in the can? Do the math. So
Absolutely.
I think it's very eye-opening when you have those moments. I
Well, yeah, I
asked,
mean, I'll give
yeah,
you just an example. So again,
yeah,
it's a metaphor. So you can buy the cards, but it's really a movement. So you can find them all on fairplaylife.com. You can find all the cards. But I'm just looking at, you just were talking about diapers. And so I'm just looking at our conception, planning, execution of just that one card.
right.
This says, let's be clear, the card holder will not be the only one changing diapers. Expect to redeal this card often. While you are the lead, you will, however, be the one responsible for maintaining inventory, including ordering new diapers or washing cloth ones, getting the soiled ones out of your home ASAP. This card holder will also oversee potty training your kids, including cleaning up the mistakes along the way. And so then it says, the planning part is determining diapering options, disposable brands and or cloth, taking inventory of diaper bags, wipes, diapers, creams, changing pad, pacifiers, extra change of clothes, loveys, toys, books, etc. Researching and or consulting with partner regarding the training plan, informing and or enlisting teachers and childcare helpers in potty changing plan and diaper sizing. Execution, purchasing appropriately sized diapers and wipes as baby grows and or coordinating with the home goods and supplies card holder, stocking diaper bags, overseeing implementation for potty training. And then I say the minimum standard of care. Is this dealt with so that you have a home where there's diapers in that home that are the appropriate size when you need them? So the reason why I bring that up is because that is just one of the 100 cards. But as you said, the mental load of just prepping for diapering and potty training is enough for basically a full-time job
And the
in a year.
research, we didn't
And
even
the
talk about that of
research.
like
Yeah. Right.
what product, and even with classes,
Yes.
we have enrolled in extracurricular activities. And sure, there's the fact that I'm taking them to most of them, but it's also I'm constantly researching where the class, like
Absolutely.
what are the best classes? What does he need? What are the options in our town? What is the schedule? Does that work? Do I have to go somewhere else? And then eventually signing up. Like it's a lot of
Yes.
mental load.
But they're there. That's the cool part, that we've done it for you. That what the cards do for you is that they provide a prompt to understand what the conception, planning, and execution would be to own that card,
Mhm.
and also present to you all 100 cards to basically say, let's get some cards off your plate. And then let's systematically talk about each of these cards so that we can be in control of them before they even come up.
And I think based on what my community said, I'm going to read, like these were the main things that
Yes,
obviously
yes,
there was an array of things that people submitted, but these were the continuous themes of the hardest part of the mental load. Relaying info to the partner, which agreed.
yes.
We catch ourselves in this cycle of, well, it's easier for me to just do it
Right.
than teach him how to do it, which is why I love the cards because they own it. Always being quote unquote on, which absolutely. And that ties into having no time for myself, not feeling the recognition of the work I'm doing, whether it be
Right.
from the labor force, your partner, your family, friends, um, not being able to turn it off. The never ending decisions, the decision fatigue is so real. It's
Yes, that's
why I
real.
have lost my love for food because I just want
Yes.
food put in front of me. I don't care
Right,
if it's
right.
cereal that has no milk. If it feeds me and I'm no longer hungry, great.
Same.
um the anticipating of needs and living in the future, which is something I hadn't thought about, but is something that I not struggle with, but it constantly is happening in my brain when it comes to clothes. Like what size are they? What season will they be the next size? I have to go
Absolutely.
in the storage with our second to figure out if that size fits him in this, and that whole shebang is exhausting. And this is one that I just had a conversation with my husband about, wanting a break, but it requiring so much work and
Yeah,
organization that it's easier to just not take the break. And
absolutely.
I hate that.
All of
And I had a
those.
breaking
All of
point
those.
recently where I cried to my husband and then my therapist, where I'm like, I hate, and I think this is unfortunately the reality of being a parent. And I say parent because I don't think that this doesn't happen for my husband. I think it just happens to a further degree for
Yeah.
me in
Yeah.
our relationship, having to run by my desires of a plan by so many people. And
Absolutely.
it's not even always for unicorn play. If I'm trying to schedule an interview for someone, but it's in LA and it's for work and I want to get there, the amount of steps it takes to figure out if I can do that, I'm just like, I'd rather not fucking do it.
I think that's one of the biggest shocks at 100%. That is one, I think the biggest shocks to the transition to parenting is, that as individualistic people that sort of grew up in
Mhm.
America saying, especially women, that we can do the same things men can do. And we, can basically make our own destiny. That the idea of asking for help is so overwhelming, and I don't even call it help. Asking for partnership from your community, from your partner. And so I will say the beauty of fair play is that, like right now, which is going to sound so different from that person who, was getting breaking down on the side of the road over blueberries. But Kim, I'm in the place now because we practiced for so long that I can just leave.
Mhm.
And so sometimes I'll have to redeal a card if it's something that I hold and it's going to be sort of extraordinary. But most of the time, uh, I can leave. And so pretty much all of this month, I've just sort of come in and out of the household. And I think the beauty of again, a fair play life is that I can do that in the similar way that men report doing that. And it feels really wonderful to be able to come in and out and have a partner who is handling the mental load.
Can I get into the
Yeah,
nitty gritty of that?
please.
Because do you think there's a large part of that that has to do with the age of your children
No,
because
no,
you don't. Because I
no.
think about this where if I'm going, I'm not like leaving notes for my husband, but it's more so where I catch myself. And my therapist asked me this question. She's like, is this real or are you putting this on yourself? But the matter of navigating, it's more so like scheduling additional childcare, that whole situation, because our kids are so young, maybe it's, I don't know, like that's what trips me up. Who owns, like, what happens to the cards you own when you're away?
Yeah, I mean, my partner is responsible for those cards, right? So I don't care who executes for him. He just is responsible for finding someone who can execute with a minimum standard of care that our family agrees on, right? So that's been the situation, since my kids have been born. I mean, since literally we've always had extra help, always, right? So that's always been wonderful, right? We moved across the country to have my mother and father-in-law be involved in our kids' help. My equation is that it takes 9 adults for 3 children. It takes 3 adults per kid. That's what I think in terms of a
Agreed.
rotation. You have to always have sort of that backup. And so, but now what I would say is that in those situations, right, that it would be your partner's responsibility to figure that out. I mean, that's because again, when your partner leaves, it's your responsibility to figure it out, right?
Yes and no.
Right.
This is
Yes.
what trips me
Yes.
up.
Yes.
Like when he leaves, I mean, yes, I guess because some of his tasks
But
and
that's what I
this
will
is
say. Everybody in the family has to be able to hold all the
right.
cards. That's
That's
it.
what I think it
That's a
is.
fair play life, right? You have to be able to hold all the cards. If it's a values decision where he says I'm at work and I can, find a babysitter, that's and so that's what, or my mother's going to help, but they're not going to get to those classes,
Right.
then yes, that's just what's going to have to happen, right? It may look different than when you are there, just like it would look different when your partner's not there. Maybe your kids are having all cereal for dinner when you would have time to go to the grocery store
Right.
otherwise, right? So I think that in a true partnership, right, the work may look different when that person is not there, because obviously when you're a single parent who have people help them, it looks different than when there's 2 people in the home.
Hmm.
But eventually, what fair play is, it's a practice so that in the system, everybody in that system can hold basically every card and redeal. That's
Okay.
really that's what the goal
Fair.
is. Yes.
Can I
Yeah.
ask your opinion
Yes,
though?
please.
When it comes to cards, and this was a question I personally had, in the sense that someone goes away, for instance, I never am thinking about trash. Okay. My husband owns that task. He is buying the trash bags, he's taking the trash out into the trash cans throughout the day. Same with the diaper bins. He's then putting the trash out on the street when it needs to, recycling, all
Yes.
of those things.
Amazing.
Okay.
Ownership. Yes.
I don't know what day trash is. I know what day recycling is because sometimes our box is so large that he needs help. So I know that Sunday nights we put out recycling, but I actually don't know what day the trash is. But when he's away, trash needs to go out. So I'm curious your thoughts on how that works. Like what happens in our household is he sends me a text the night before being like, reminder, please put the trash out. So he's
Right.
still
I don't,
mentally
right. I don't love that idea because again, it's so similar. Most of the time it's women doing that to men and they call it nagging, which is so gendered. I call it the random assignment of a task. So
Mhm.
typically what I would like to happen is, and this again, this is for when you're going away, right? And this is somebody who's already in the system. But
Right.
typically when you're in the system,
We're
what
getting
you're
granular,
doing,
but I'm
we're
curious.
getting very granular, is that so most of the cards in the fair play deck are meant to be redealt. There are some cards like Seth, exactly in our house, he's a garbage owner. And so that typically will not be redealt to me unless he is on a trip. So the
Okay.
way
So
that could
then you
be
kind of
redealt,
hand it over.
right? It would either be that we need the trash to go out that week. Sometimes it'll mean, okay, I didn't get to it and we're like piling over with trash for that one week because I didn't get a chance to redeal it, right? But typically what's happening is that part of the fair play system, right, is, and let's just make it very clear, a system is only as good as people willing to sit down at the table for it. And the reason why the home has, people have struggled, I believe, to consider the home an organization. And you asked me this early before off screen. Why is it so hard to have these conversations? It's because it requires a secret formula of actually three things. It requires boundaries, Cam. It requires systems and communication. So typically, we have not, as a couple or anywhere in society, really practice any of those three things as women. Boundaries, we're definitely not practiced in how do we ask for what we need, and how to hold boundaries. We love to anticipate other people's discomfort and then change our actions to accommodate those people's discomfort. So we're breaching our boundaries all the time. We use zero systems in the home, as we talked about for the past hour. And then on top of it, we're not trained to communicate when emotion is low and cognition is high. In fact, we're often giving feedback in the moment. Why is the garbage liner back in? Fuck you, I'm not getting your blueberries, right? It's so it becomes out in rage, and it often comes out in feedback in the moment when you can't hold it in any longer. And so these conversations don't feel safe anymore for both parties. So you retreat into your corners, and then you start saying things, well, in the time it takes me to tell him, her, they what to do, I should do it myself, because it's not safe to have these conversations. And so we have to restore a practice of boundaries, systems, and communication. This is a hard thing to do. It is why, again, fair play has had to become a movement, because you have to be willing to believe that your time is equal to your partner's time.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be willing to understand that a system will glitch and fail, but that it's worth coming back to the table for. There will be times when you're going away and maybe your child is eating Lucky Charms for dinner. There will be times where things fall through the cracks. But to rebuild that accountability and trust, you keep coming back to the table. We have to understand that this is not one and done conversation. And I think people
Mm-hmm.
really want it to be. But that's like me coming
Well,
to you,
because
Cam,
wouldn't
and
that be
saying, yes,
nice?
how nice would that be? But it's like me coming to you and saying, you can be fit by having exercised once in 2005, and you're going to be your heart's going to be cardio healthy for the rest of your life. Unfortunately, nothing good works that way. And
Right.
so we're here to tell you that there are going to be hard days. There are going to be hard conversations, but the practice of sitting down every week when emotion is low and cognition is high, Cam, has been the most impactful thing in my life, because
I
that is
totally agree.
why the boundary systems communication is what has allowed me to implement the system. So
Mm-hmm.
because Seth and I do sit down anyway every week, there isn't usually a situation where I don't know what cards he's holding or he doesn't know what I'm holding, because that is the conversation that we're used to having over the past 7 years. And we've been practicing and practicing. And so that is why, again, I can leave the house now, not because I say, you figure it out, go fuck yourself. It's because I say to Seth, okay, I'm sorry I'm putting the additional burden of Tuesdays and Thursdays transporting our kids to school. I understand it's a hardship for you to start your work day at 10:30 those days when you're already starting your work day those days at Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I understand it's going to be harder for you to find someone to pick up three kids from three different schools when I leave this week on a Thursday. But when you have empathy for that person because you anticipate their discomfort, but you don't solve it, you allow them to be a partner and say it's going to be harder, then the planning you're going to do over time, Cam, to practice and practice that, it means that when your children are my children's age, which are 15, 12, and 7, that you will be in a position where all of those trips will feel so validating for you, because there won't be that discomfort that you're leaving at home. It may be there, but it'll never feel the way it does in the beginning.
Yeah. And I think that this is such a common feeling
Yeah.
for so many,
Yes.
because whenever
Yes.
I leave, I get so many questions of like, how did you make this work? What did you tell Joe?
Yeah.
Who's helping? Like all of those questions. And we make it work. It's honestly it's a big me kind of control thing of like letting go of the control, but it's hard and it takes work. I want to quickly end with the unicorn play because I think it's so
Yes. Yes.
important.
Yes.
And I think it's something that, whoops, I think it's something that so many women struggle with. Literally had a conversation today with a friend on a walk where I said, I'm jealous of my husband because he prioritizes time for himself to just
Yes.
have
Yes.
fun, golf. And I'm angry and jealous that if he has 2 free hours in a day, he prioritizes that. Whereas I find if I have that time, I'm looking for tasks around the house
Yeah.
that, like, swapping out the seasonal clothing for my kids, like shit that just fills my day. So I've made it a priority to try and do more things that I find enjoyable for myself, whether it be tennis, cross stitching,
Love it.
spending time with friends, just hanging out, which I know you said doesn't necessarily count as
No,
you
it
include
does,
that.
but we'll talk a bit. We'll
Okay.
talk about
Um,
that.
Things like that, where gardening, where it's just me and I get to just enjoy myself and I'm not multitasking. I'm focusing on one thing.
Okay, well, let's just go back to that formula. So, for those of you who are listening to this for the first time, a lot of people say to me that your work needs a trigger warning, which I always found really interesting, right? Because you think of that more in terms of, really hard topics around, safety, assault,
Mhm.
whatever. But I think what's so painful, Cam, and we can end on this, is that the system and the communication feel so hard because of the boundaries issue. So let's get to the root of why we're still fighting these conversations, why women hold that statistic of 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family, regardless of whether they work outside the home. And it gets worse if they make more money. It's really because of one thing. And I had to find this and discover it in my research again over 10 years. And that's because as a society, we treat and we hold men's time as if it's diamonds, and it's finite. And we treat and we view women's time as if it's infinite, like sand.
Yep.
So that one concept put everything into perspective for me in terms of why women don't have fun, why we're parents, partners, and professionals on repeat, why men are able to guard their time because they've been taught to since birth. So, for example, I'll give you examples of how you see that come up in your culture, conditioning since birth. For example, like in 2024, there's still health systems all over this country that say things like breastfeeding is free when it's 1900 hours, right? It's a full time job. It's only free if women's time is worthless, literally worth zero. We watch something called occupational segregation happening everywhere, where you look at, nurse practitioners or teachers, you look at positions where, or nannies or house cleaners, where they're primarily women and they're called occupationally segregated. So when women enter a male profession, Cam, salaries automatically come down. Again, women's time is less valuable. So unfortunately, what happens to women is that we start internalizing this message that our time is less valuable. So instead of protecting and guarding our time the way men do, and the way society does for men, and if you don't believe me, just call 50 schools like I did for Fair Play and ask them why they call women and not men, right? Spoiler alert, it's not because they're on the top of some list. It's because men don't pick up, right? Whereas women, when I ask them if their school is calling and they don't pick up, get stress responses just from hearing that scenario, Cam, when I ask them,
Yeah.
not the actual scenario. They tell me their heart is pounding by
No, my body goes into
visualizing
full
that, right?
shakes when
But
my
like,
phone rings and it says the
exactly.
school.
But even visualizing that, women were telling me that their heart was starting to pound. So what we have to do is come back, return to this idea that this work requires a trigger warning because it's very painful to realize that we're complicit in our own oppression.
Yep.
It's very, very painful to understand that we start to say things to live easier in a system like that. We start saying things to ourselves like, well, of course, I'm going to be the one picking up the kids from school, taking the kid to art at 11 because my job is more flexible. My partner makes more money than me. Um, of course, I'm the one, doing all these things at home because in the time it would take me to tell Seth what to do, I should do it myself. So that's number two. The third most common thing women say to themselves to live easier in the system and become complicit in their own oppression is that we're better multitaskers, that somehow we're wired differently for care. The fourth one we say is, yes, we're both colorectal surgeons. This is a true exact quote. But my partner is better at focusing on one task at a time and I can find the time. So unless we were, Albert Einstein and we could fuck with the space-time continuum, right? And actually find time, what we're not finding time, unfortunately. So what happens is that we're just conditioned from birth to spend our time differently in the service of others in a way that men are just not. And it's not their fault. If someone has been guarding my time forever, then I'm going to be able to leave without guilt and shame to prioritize that diamond time. Whereas I've been told my time is worthless, I'm going to give that time away for free.
Yep.
And so the way to start to change that paradigm is very hard. And it requires people like you, Cam. It requires the people out there who are willing to be cultural influencers telling women that they don't have to live that way anymore. And it's a movement. So I can't tell you to find a hobby, because what that's going to be is that's going to be a man giving you some random wellness advice, which I see all the time, that tells you to wake up at 3:30 a.m. for your fucking hobby, right? No. What it means is that you deserve a permission to be unavailable from your roles. I'm going to say it again. Cam deserves a permission to be unavailable from her roles. And that requires an ability to invest in three things. Friendship, yes, as we said. Definitely self-care. Go to the doctor, walk your dog on the beach. That's not a manicure. That's not commodified wellness. It's actual real self-care, what you would do on a desert island.
Does a
But the
workout
third,
count?
yes, of course. Of
Okay.
course. That's the cardio health, the practice we were talking about
Okay.
earlier. But the third thing is the most important. And that's what we were talking about earlier. And it's why there's certain different types of fun. The third thing is why it's called unicorn space, is because it is special. What's linked to your longevity is not the fun that we call hedonic fun. It's not the drinking. It's not the girls' trip once a year. Those are great too. It's not the doom scrolling. It's not the binge watching television. It's not edibles, and it's not mommy juice. What it is instead is what we call eudaimonia. It's a practice of three things. And in fact, your podcast is one of your unicorn spaces, even though it is tied to your profession, because I'll tell you why. You're practicing three things. You're practicing curiosity. You're practicing connection with others. You're sharing yourself with the world. And the most important part is you're practicing completion. You're not living in a graveyard of unfulfilled dreams. You're doing something, as much as you may hate an episode or the way your sound of your voice sounds, you edit something and you get it out in the world. That cycle of curiosity, connection, and completion is what's linked to those long-term longevity outcomes. If there is a profession involved, you need more of it. It doesn't mean this isn't one.
Yeah. Okay. That makes
You
sense.
evolve it. You need another one. But the most
Okay.
important way I can tell you you're in a unicorn space, and not just self-care and friendship time, which are important, but the things that I'm talking to you, and if, again, this is a 101 episode, you can read my second book. I explain the science in it. But that cycle of curiosity, connection, and completion in a consistent manner, those 4 C's, leads you to the opposite of languishing. It leads to a flourishing. And you're there, or you've done it, one of those cycles, because you say to yourself, I can't believe I just did that.
I love
And
this.
so that's all I want to gift to you and to your listeners, is that this whole conversation is to get you to a place where you feel, without guilt and shame, you can have experiences outside of your roles where you say to yourself the rest of your life at different intervals, I can't fucking believe I just did that. That is the most common. Renee, I'll just tell you one last thing about this amazing woman who was one of the first I can't believe I just did that interviews for me. She's a woman who at 56 said that the number one thing she was feeling in her life was stuck. Adam Grant calls this languishing, that you're on repeat, that you don't remember one day from the next, that Monday feels like Friday. And so for her, the opposite of stuck was speed. She had this idea that she was going to get unstuck. And so she rented a Porsche Carrera in Mexico. She found a navigator, and at the last minute, on a whim, she enters something called the Carrera Americana race across Mexico. And what happens to her is she places in this race. She's the oldest and woman to ever place. And now at 68, she's the only racer to ever claim that she's been able to race cars on every continent. And her daughter's her manager, and said that she knows her mom in such a different way now, that she knows her as a human, not just a mother. But That's for another
which is
podcast.
so
So
important.
important. But what I love about Renee, and we don't all have to be Renee, but what she reminds me all the time is that every time she crossed another finish line or crashed, she would say to herself, I can't fucking believe I just did that. I can't believe I just did that. And so I want to live like Renee. And so
Me
every time
too.
I do something hard, I say to myself, I can't believe I just did that. And it's so
What was your
hard.
last? I can't believe I just did that.
I
Or
would
one
say,
that sticks out
yes,
to you.
probably we did a screening of the Fair Play documentary, which is on Hulu if anybody wants to watch that instead of, read the book. We did a screening for the Senate and for House representatives. And so seeing this, idea turn into this documentary that was directed by the first partner of California that was influencing culture on this big level, it was, and I can't believe I just did that moment for me.
That's amazing. And
Yeah.
and that is a real, I can't believe I just did that.
Yeah. It was cool.
Well, Eve, this was honestly as better than I could have ever imagined. And I am so grateful that you took the time, but also that you have done this work for so many of us to hopefully find systems that
Yes.
help us operate and find more time, or not find more time, but protect our time
Yeah.
to
See, you just
do,
changed the
yeah,
paradigm just there, right there.
what the fuck we want to do. Because I don't want to spend it always cleaning up diapers. I am so appreciative of you. For everyone who's listening who wants more of you, where can they support you?
Well, like I said, watch the documentary. It's really funny. First of all, let's thank Joe also because thank you for the men who show up as true partners,
Absolutely.
and who are practicing that are doing something actually incredibly subversive in our culture right now. And so I really appreciate them so much.
This
So
house would
thank
not
you,
run
Joe.
without him. I tell
Yes.
him all the time.
So
Truly.
let's talk and call out our partners out there. And yes, and so find us fairplaylife.com. Like I said, if you don't want any of these extra tools, you can just go to that website. You can see what we're talking about. You can look at the all of the 100 cards. You can just start by asking your partner one night at dinner who did the grocery shopping in their house growing up. There's so many ways to just start these
Yep.
conversations. You don't have to just go and redeal the cards if you're not ready for it, but just enter our world, enter the Fair Play world. Come join us on the website. You can follow me on Instagram. We have a Fair Play Life Instagram that has all of our data that we release as we release it. A lot of studies, a lot of articles for you to, so you feel like you're not alone. And of course, like I said, the documentary on Hulu, it's free to watch if you have it. It's just I think it's a fun way to introduce fair play to your partner because I think you'll feel like you can relate to at least one of the couples and that we follow.
Perfect. Well, all of that will be in the show notes. And again, I really appreciate you. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Cam.